You're listening to the Veteran Etc. podcast, as there's always more to be said about a veteran. Join your host, Mike Kim, a veteran, ex-monk, seasoned war trauma therapist, and writer, as he shares his years of research in veteran readjustment culture and the meaning of warrior life. Now, here's your host, Mike Kim.
Veteran Etc. This is a show based on veteran readjustment culture, not just veteran culture. We look at the lives of veterans, their views, the things that they produce, whether it's art, literature, history. We basically look at narratives, not just from the headlines, not just from the marquee lights, not just from the movie houses, from the TV screens, not from even podcasts. We go beyond. And so we're here proud to have Master Sergeant Pedro Munoz-Dones from the Army, from the Coast Guard, from the Marine Corps. He's been an officer. He's been an enlisted man in and out of the military, much like me, but is one who's inspired me. Believe it or not, one of the first mentors, if not the first mentor that I had from the military. So we're pleased to have you. And I'd like you to say a little bit of yourself so that the audience can know more about you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. It's good evening here in Spain. Here in Spain, it's 20:45, so 8:45 p.m. Time in Spain is good. It's cold in southern Spain right now, where I live in a small village called Morón de la Frontera in Andalusia, in the very heart, throbbing heart of Andalusia here. Even flamenco here is different from anywhere else. Very unique place to live. And I'm blessed to be here, and I'm blessed that we have reconnected and that this is going on. So what I can say is that my journey was a very long and arduous journey filled with a great variety of obstacles and challenges. And some of them I was able to take on and negotiated those obstacles successfully. Others, I probably broke something along the way as I was negotiating the obstacle. And eventually I was able to deal with those obstacles as well. But in the end, there were many obstacles and many challenges that I simply was not able to successfully complete or successfully remove. So one accomplishes as much as one can. And I think some time ago, I met someone told me, man, you've had a very convoluted career. I say, that's a very good way to describe it. However, that person fails to see all the effort that took. He was merely criticizing my journey in a very derogatory way for him not knowing any better. And this is typically the kind of people that you encounter everywhere you go in life. Everywhere you go in life, you find people that are made of a higher grade of quality, of human quality. They have a print in their soul, in their heart, in their mind. And they care not only for themselves, but also care to show the way and show the ropes to others. Well, there's not too many people like that. But I was fortunate that I've met people like that. And I wanted to always emulate them. And perhaps that's why my journey ended up as it was. It was, in the end, a very successful journey in the midst of all the obstacles and all the challenges and all the snares and traps that others placed on me, some of which I took, some of which I was able to evade. But in the end, there's no grudges. There's no hatred. I'm free from all this negative things. Whoever did me wrong, I probably did wrong to some people too, because I'm obviously not perfect. There was folks out there I probably did wrong. Do I remember who that was or why I did that? Did I do that on purpose? Or I don't think so. I don't think I ever did any wrong to anyone on purpose. But if I did, I hope they forgive me. But there was people that I had to discipline very harshly. There was people I had to apply the full force of the Uniform Code of Military Justice as it was permitted to my level, and then recommend to a higher level. People that I had them be discharged from the service, But I didn't mean to do them wrong. I was the instrument of a certain element of justice at that time.
Right.
I had to do my part.
Let me cut in, because I think our audience is going to wonder, why did I choose you? And I would say, because I think of the introduction that you gave, it gives a gem to the veteran community to maybe go back and see the things that they've learned, much like the things that you've learned, and the things that you're sharing with us are things that we all can pick up in our now veteran existence. I just think this is because the theme of this episode is veteran leadership, and it's learning from our military experiences. And I just think, your background goes back to 1975 in experiencing military training, and all the way, until just recently. And I just think it's just a great thing to have, so that people can understand readjustment in a, how can I say, Khyber Pass kind of way, in a unconventional way. But the bottom line is getting to the end, and that's the bottom line. And you've got that, and you've done that quite gracefully, as we can see now, as you look as you did back in 30 years ago when we met. So can you go on to explain some of your background, and we can get into these different topics?
Well, I would like to highlight a little bit that I was fortunate enough, when I was a boy growing up in the 1960s, so go way back, and I was born in the 50s. So in the early 1960s, I was a boy growing up in Puerto Rico, USA. But Puerto Rico was not always USA. Puerto Rico used to be a province, an overseas province of the Kingdom of Spain. And my family, or the family that I came from, was instrumental in a lot of things that happened in Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico was part of Spain. And it was interesting to grow up in this ambiance of this family history and these things that always provided some sort of a frame of reference as a point of departure. There was a long history and persons of this family, ancestors and more recent 19th century folks, that have been in the Spanish military of their time. Like my great-great-grandfather, he came to Puerto Rico in 1793. He was an officer in the Spanish Army. So these were not people that came with folks that came in the 1500s. They came much later. So it was a different sort of folks. And that's a story in and of itself, but it sets a point of departure for my own pursuit for excellence in the profession of arms. Of course, I am born in Puerto Rico, while Puerto Rico is part of the United States, which it still is. So my goal was to be in the American Army, of course. But I've had people in my family who had been in the U.S. Army and in the Marines and even in the Army Air Corps. Nevertheless, that background or backdrop truly instills in me a great deal of desire. I was fortunate enough to listen to stories, war stories, we would say, from folks who have been in World War One, World War Two, Korea, and Vietnam. So it was a privilege to grow up in an environment where there were so many men and some women too who had been in the services at those times. So that was pretty much my upbringing.
This is what we're going to talk about in Veterans of Color podcast, the new project started by Coming Home Well. So save that for your interview with VOC, because I think this is just like fantastic and rich, and we're going to get that narrative. But I was just wondering, you had set up the frame about your early life, your ancestors, which I like to probe on this show, and you kind of give kind of the basics into how that would inspire a warrior life, a life of service. And I was just wondering how did that actually begin on a very practical level?
When I was 5 years old, I put on my father's medals and played outside. And he had a cousin who had been in World War II in Korea, and that was his best friend. His name was Luis Fernando Rios. His real name was Munoz, but he was an illegitimate child, and his father never gave him our last name, so he had his mother's last name. Again, the reality of functionality or lack of functionality with the family as it was. This man was a 90-day wonder during World War II. Okay, so he's one of those fellas that went to the OCS version, Army OCS version of Fort Benning in Georgia for 90 days. And in 90 days, they made you a basic infantry officer, and up you went to the front. So he had been a corporal in the 65th Infantry Regiment of his day, and because he knew how to type right, he spoke English. He was a Caucasian person, and he had green eyes and blondish hair, and he knew how to type. He spoke English. So his sergeant major of the regiment said, "Hey, you're going to work for me." So he was, he was at the regimental S1. And some of his buddies from the Citizens Military Training Camps, which was a training camp that existed in the 30s to give people military training, were sergeants, and he was still a corporal. He wanted to be a sergeant, so he was talking with the sergeant major to see what he could do to be a sergeant. And the regimental sergeant major said, "Hey, I'm going to take care of you." So they sent him to OCS.
Yeah.
And the application for OCS in 1942 or 41, late 41 or early 42, just one page, had 2 signatures, and that was that. Nothing like today. So he inspired me a great deal with his stories and his recollections of World War II and Korea. So that's important. That's important to share, because his life showed me a picture of what my life could be like.
That's right.
Then I was a Boy Scout in a troop where most of the adult leaders, or in fact all of them, were veterans of World War II or Korea or both. And they imparted their values based on their experiences of World War II and Korea. These were very...
We're gonna do that at VOC. This is the 60 minutes version. So
that was amazing.
That's incredible. And so how did that, because I know you started boot camp you started your first military training outside of the Boy Scouts. And can we go there, because that's just so fascinating, and then continue this illustrious journey? Because I tell you, this could be the third testament, but we're going to save half of it for VOC, and then we're going to have this half for veteran, etc. So
while I was with the Boy Scouts,
yes,
one time I read this article on the paper about the Naval Sea Cadets.
Okay.
And I realized that I never knew about this organization. So they had the U.S. Naval Sea Cadets had a detachment at the old naval base in Isla Grande, which was a naval air station, but they had just closed it, and they have moved that detachment to a smaller Coast Guard base in San Juan. And I went and visited these guys, and I took an entrance test and I passed it, and I joined the Naval Sea Cadet Corps, the unit that they had in San Juan, Puerto Rico at that time. And there
What year
was
was
there
that?
that was in San Juan, Puerto Rico.
What year?
Oh, that was 1974.
And that wasn't an insult, folks. I just want to let you know that this is such a special interview because you're not going to meet someone that has this range of military training. I mean, just think, 1973, my first contract was like signed in 1986. So if you think I'm an old timer, we've got this old timer who also was in, throughout my time in the military, and also, going into the global war on terror, hardcore. So going back to this Sea Cadet journey where we begin.
1975, I go to Navy boot camp, real Navy boot camp. This wasn't a watered down version or anything like that, but it was shortened for the Sea Cadets. So it was about 3 weeks of training, but it wasn't any easier or any softer. It was the same thing that the actual Navy recruits were doing. This were adolescent men. There was no girls there. I don't remember. Yes, there was a platoon of women too. I recall that. There was a platoon of females, and they did everything that the Navy was doing. I mean, it was fantastic experience. We went to the gas chamber. We had to do firefighting training, a real firefighting school for shipboard firefighting for real, where you get, if you don't do it right, you might just get hurt. So, it was amazing to this day. I mean, it was like, my God, you thought you were in the Navy, because in a way you were. For 3 weeks, you were there with Navy instructors. They had a Sea Cadet cadre, but some of those people in the Sea Cadet cadre were former actual military, and some of them were cadets of a senior rank, older cadets that had received more training and so forth. But in general, it was all real Navy personnel teaching the classes and the courses and the training and the marling spike and everything, and the inspections and the marching and the weapons, everything. It was just, that was it. That was the acid test. From then on, I know, I mean, I already knew I wanted to be in the military, but that experience truly was fascinating. Truly was fascinating. We'll fast forward a little bit, and I joined the Marine Corps right out of high school in 1978. And I go to Paris Island and the buddy program. My old friend Roberto Ramirez de Arellano, he has a story of its own. He retired also as a master sergeant from the Army Guard, but initially he was in the Marine Corps with me. We were in the Marine Corps together, and at Paris Island, platoon 3069. And the drill instructors that I had were all instrumental in my life. They really planted a lot of seeds. To this day, I remember them. Staff Sergeant Hebb, Sergeant Stengel, and Sergeant Blumenthal. And I had the distinct professional pleasure of having served with all of them subsequently as years went by. And I saw them as gunnery sergeants or as first sergeants, and one of them even as a chief warrant officer, and later limited duty officer, commissioned officer. Blumenthal retired from the Marine Corps, maybe as a major or lieutenant colonel. I don't recall that, but when I first met him, he was a sergeant. When I go to Texas A&M, he's a gunnery sergeant, and he's there. So he used to say that I was his nemesis.
Yeah. Wow.
He was a very tough man. It was very tough on me, but I'm very grateful for everything he taught me. This guy was so tough that when I was a recruit at Paris Island, we actually fought each other.
Yeah, back
I
then,
wasn't afraid of him, that's for sure.
in
But
the
I tell
old
you
Corps.
what, he was tough indeed. So he really turned me into a pretzel, threw me on top of a Foot Locker, and that was pretty much the end of it, you know?
And so after boot camp, the journey begins, and again into the fleet, and then into other things, college. Graduating from a senior military college at one of the illustrious military colleges, where General Patton said, "If I had a handful of Aggies, we'd end this war." Referring to World War II quickly. So yeah, like
A&M was
it,
a good place to go to school.
so you
Uh,
were in the fleet, in the Marines, and then you ended up at Texas A&M, right?
well, I was an enlisted man in the Marine Corps, and
Okay.
I had that's quite a story right there. We
Okay.
couldn't possibly summarize that was only 3 years, but in 3 years you can have a lifetime.
Yeah.
You can have a lifetime. So I left the Marine Corps, got my first honorable discharge, and I returned to Puerto Rico to start college. So I go to Puerto Rico, go back to the island, and I started college on the island, majoring in liberal arts and things like that. Very uh, kind of nice thoughts and poetry and literature and things like that.
You still play guitar?
I did for some time, but I haven't in so many years. I probably forgot
I
everything.
remember that.
I even used to dance classical ballet. I mean,
Wow.
so really, it was a very significant shift from the Marine Corps to that. And in ballet, the girls there were very pretty and very sweet. So it was a very hard. It was motivational
Yes.
in many ways. And the fitness that I acquired while I was in the
Yes.
fine arts was unbelievable, which
Yeah.
it helped me later on when I went back into the services. While I was in
Wow.
Puerto Rico, I spent some time with the Army ROTC, and it was good. But I wasn't convinced that I wanted to pursue the Army as an officer at that time. So then came the opportunity to go to New York Maritime College. I spent
Oh
some
yeah.
time there, but things didn't fan out. I just did not have the depth of mathematical background that I needed to survive. New York Maritime was an engineering school.
Yeah, it's one of the toughest in regards to maritime engineering, and then you have to worry about military corps cadet
Oh,
stuff. So yeah.
that place was, if you're a mathematician, you were good to go because it was an engineering school. And of course, I was not doing well there, but I was able to transfer from there to Texas A&M. I tried going to VMI, but VMI told me, we really would like to take you, but we don't want to. You're too old to come here.
That's right. Yeah.
So they had, and I was talking with some people there. They were very sincere about it. This
It's
is
true.
how we do things here. It's
Back
not
then.
going to go. It'd be different. You'd be a day student, but for you to go through the Corps cadets, you're too mature to be with these kids here.
Yes.
Yes. And same for the Citadel, for that matter. So, but A&M was fine. So I go to A&M, and I begin my journey at A&M, which, of course, like all journeys, you have ups and downs. But altogether, A&M was a great place for me to go to school. I'm very grateful that I graduated from there. I graduated from there, class of '86, and it was the last class that graduated without having to take final examinations. So it was quite a privilege, quite a privilege that we didn't have to take final examinations. But in a way, we already taken final examinations or midterms. Your midterms was usually your final grade, or you were given some special project or a special test of some sort, and that was then your final grade. But during finals weeks, which usually was 1 or 2 weeks worth of abuse, you were free to get ready to graduate, and I'll do all the parades and all the ceremonies. And it was a fantastic journey. I met some great people at Texas A&M. I had some pretty good classmates, and others not so great, but that's how it is. Everywhere you go, you have some good buddies and others not so good. But you always learn a lot about yourself. And at A&M, what I learned out there was that sometimes A&M focused too much on their own traditions and campusology. We had this big manual called the Standard, and the Standard was a beautiful book that told you everything you needed to know to be an Aggie. But they didn't tell us anything that you should have known to learn how to be a soldier and a man of war. And that was my conflict there.
Yes.
And I would try to instill this in some people, those that were receptive to receive it because they were savvier than others or more perceptive than others. But it wasn't always received. So there was a little bit of conflict there with some of these cadets who were really full of what we used to call it, he was old red, a big Red Bull. It was funny. And I say, oh, I understand, but none of that's going to work when you go into service. You need to learn first aid. You need to learn how to fight. You need to learn basic soldiering. More than all this campusology and all this information, which is nice. But is none of this is of any effort in the real services. But things at A&M that were absolutely wonderful was the fact that you had to meet everybody. You had to meet everyone. And you were at least supposed to make effort to remember all these names. This was difficult, believe me. It was difficult to remember everyone's name. It wasn't just the name. It was the name of the person. What class was he or she? What class? There's women there already, not too many, but there was some back then. Now there's a whole lot. You had to remember the name of the person, what class, the rank, where were they from, what were they majoring in. I mean, that was a lot of information, on each person. It's like you had like a little mini dossier on each person. We're talking, you had to meet hundreds of people. You were supposed, in theory, and this was good about A&M, in theory, you had to meet everyone in your entire battalion within that semester, within your first semester. I think it was. I don't remember the rule. So A&M was a lot of good things, but like old places, there was other things that were like, back then. And then there was some conflict there with myself and some of those cadets. Don't know, they were envious or jealous because I had some experience that they didn't. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was too cocky. It doesn't matter now. But back then, that was a source of contention.
Yeah, and then how did that all work out? You graduate from a senior military college. People don't understand Texas A&M. It started off as a military college, and then later the civilian component kind of became larger than the military component. But it's still huge. Right. Yeah.
The Corps Cadets is at best, well, at least
it's the largest corps. I think it's the largest corps in the country.
1,700, but sometimes it was just 1,100. So it depends. It depends on the time of the year. Like early in the year, it's going to be maybe 1,700, 1,800 even. I'm talking how it was. We're talking mid 80s.
Yeah, that's different. Yeah.
Mid 80s. This is a whole different world. I have no idea what's going on there now. I'm sure they're doing great things because A&M has always done great things.
Yeah.
So I'm certain that they are still doing great things, But I can talk about A&M as it was when I went there in 84, 83, 84. It was a whole different world, a whole different world. And but it was a fascinating world, and you could feel the vibrancy and the energy of the history of such a great school. It is a grand school.
Yes.
And at some point, they stopped being a small military college, which is what they used to be, and they became a large university. And eventually, it became a world-renowned university.
Yeah.
And when I come to Texas A&M, it's already that era. Is the era of Texas A&M as a world-renowned university, and there was 43,000 students at Texas A&M of my era when I first showed up there, and maybe 1,100 cadets or 1,400 cadets. and we are the pulse. The Corps cadets was the pulse of that entire university. It was a very privileged situation to find oneself in, but yet the academic pressure was enormous, enormous. Your grades were posted on a board for everyone to see if you were failing or succeeding. I mean, the pressure was unbelievable, unbelievable. There was all this, but it was good. Every company had a contest to see which company was the best in academic standing. And that will, of course, raise the academic standing of the battalion. Then you had your military training, whatever military training we did there from the Corps cadets, which was kind of watered down. And then, of course, you have more real military training from the ROTC, the actual ROTC. All the branches had ROTC detachments there, and real military personnel, active duty military personnel instructing. Each outfit or company had advisors associated with them. There were regular military officers, men and women that were posted there. It was a real military school.
Yes.
It's a real military school.
Yeah.
But some people used to say, no, this is just like a large fraternity. Well, there was, of course, in all military colleges, there are fraternity elements because it's a fraternal organization.
Right, right.
But it was a military academy in every sense of the word. And of course, we did all kinds of crazy things as anyone will do in a military school. Like we had all these traditions of different marches and different costumes and different things that happen at the mess hall.
Yeah.
The formations at different times of the day and what happened.
And
it was just a fascinating journey.
it sounds like just an incredible journey. I mean, that could be a show in itself.
Pretty much.
I'm wondering, you know, and I pull up my whole Norwich background, and I say, let's go to commissioning, because now you're making me want to talk about Norwich.
Yeah, I'm sure it switches you on to your Norwich days.
Yeah,
which was one of our sister schools. You know.
Yeah. So what? So then you go back into the military after to A&M?
I was fortunate enough to have completed the Marine Corps officer candidate course version for ROTC, which was called Bulldog. The Bulldog version, the full OCS version, and the Marine Corps was of that time, I think was 11 and a half weeks.
Yeah.
Or 10 and a half weeks.
Yeah.
The full OCS.
Yes. Yeah.
For ROTC.
Intense.
For ROTC was about 6.5 weeks, I believe.
Yeah.
I believe. But it was intense. And the theory was that if you were ROTC coming from Texas A&M, VMI, Citadel, Norwich, VPI, or any other military academy, you better be at the 5th level of normal OCS, because Bulldog began as if you had already been there for 5 weeks. That was intense. There was times while I was at OCS that I had to really reach down deep.
Yes.
Reach down deep, and I was like, wow, I really want this bad enough, so I'm here till I graduate.
Yeah. So then you complete this intense program, and you're in the Marine Corps, and how is life going? And if we could go into the other parts of the military so that I can get the knowledge and the wisdom from you for our guests, because I feel as though the narrative is so vast that, and I've even invited you for an oral history, it's just so rich. And I think that from that, extracting the different contributions in regards to understanding leadership, because this show really tries to help veterans kind of transition. And I really want veterans to hear some of the things that could be useful to them. And so then can you briefly summarize the military career so that we can get into some of that rich knowledge that you offer us?
I was fortunate enough to get commissioned from Texas A&M. Then I went to the basic course at Quantico, Virginia, and I graduated from that. Not without struggle. I had to struggle a great deal while I was at the basic course with the land navigation portion of it. They used to call me the land nav whiz, but I became so good at land nav that then I was awesome at land nav. After that, I went to the infantry officer course. I graduated from there too. Met some fabulous people both at the VOC and at the IOC. And then finally showed up to the fleet. I was with 2nd Battalion, 2nd Regiment. I had to think about that because I had been in that regiment before as an enlisted man, but not in the same battalion. So I was with 2-2, Company G, 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marine Regiment, and the commanding officer was nonetheless the Colonel John W. Ripley, whom I have met when he was a lieutenant colonel and I was a young corporal. So this was some kind of follow-up. All along through the years, I have met people that I served with, people like Logsdon. I met Logsdon when he was a 2nd lieutenant. Later on, I had him again as an instructor when he was a captain, and I kept in touch with him till he was a lieutenant colonel. Then I lost touch with him. Same with James C. Snell, John W. Ripley. These folks just showed me some ropes, and they showed me a great deal about leadership through their example and their tenacity in dealing with adversity. Is really what kept me on my feet, and perhaps what saved my mind as well as my heart through the darkest moments in my life. So these folks, these tough men, who most of whom have been in Vietnam at an earlier stage in their careers, just had a great deal of compassion in them as well. These were very tough men, but yet they also had a heart full of compassion, and they understood when to squeeze and when not to squeeze, to show you the way so that you will grow in your confidence. Yes. And grow in your skill to master a skill level, and what things you have to do for the craft of your work, the craft of being a man of war, which is somewhat of a violent existence, and yet is also a peaceful existence.
And so then throughout the Marines, you end up going into other branches, and yes, I'm just intrigued because again, we have to get back to that knowledge. This podcast is a service-oriented podcast, my brother, but VOC, we're going to get really intricate in regards to the details of all of this, which is beautiful. And I didn't tell you that beforehand. So forgive me, audience, and forgive me, Pedro, Master Sergeant, because it's such a rich history that it truly deserves an oral history as well as on Veteran of Color podcast and any other podcast. I'm not just saying, VOC. It's a very legitimate, highly intriguing narrative, a warrior narrative. And so thank you. And so, yeah, so you shared some of these gems from the Marine Corps, and then transitioning from there, I'm sure, is it close to the Persian Gulf War or what's happening?
Mm-hmm. I was not able to remain in the Marine Corps as an officer due to some issues that took place during the time I was in the service. Yeah, so I had to leave the Marine Corps, and I was able to reinvent myself.
Yes.
While I was still in the Marine Corps Reserve, because I left active duty and I come back to Texas. I spent some time in College Station, where Texas A&M is, because that was my point of departure. So when you are somewhat disoriented, you need to go back to start point. So I went back to start point.
Yes, that's a good point. Veterans.
You know,
So I'm gonna start extracting certain things that Master Sergeant is talking about, because he makes a great point. In your veteran journey, recognize, certain certain hiccups along the way, whether they're physical or situational. There's always room to go beyond them, and it sounds like you're, in this particular case, yeah, you're in College Station and you're reinventing yourself still as a Marine, in the unit, in this new unit, right?
at the time, I spent some time in the reserves, and
Yeah.
I think it was the 23rd Regiment in Houston. So I
Mhm.
would live in College Station and drive to Houston to do the drills. But it was a fascinating experience. Met some wonderful people out there. So it really allowed me to retain that camaraderie from the Marine Corps. The good aspects of my Marine Corps journey continued for a little while longer. But then I went back to where I graduated from, which was for me a very important place. It was my point of departure. And it allowed me to regain a sense of orientation, because I was somewhat disoriented. Here, I wanted to be a Marine for the rest of my life, and have my dreams of someday being whatever. Well, those things did not materialize. Those things did not happen. So I had to reconsider other things. Going back to start point allow me to regain a visual from a vantage point, so to speak. I had to go back to a vantage point to look at what is the objective. What is the objective here? From a vantage point, what does it really look like? What does it really look like? So some of these things that I learned in the Marine Corps, in the craft of the infantry, in the craft of combat, in the craft of war, are instrumental for all of life. You have to do a reconnaissance. You do several reconnaissance, ideally, not just one. You do it during the daytime, of course, so you see what's going on. Then you go back at night. You do a reconnaissance from a vantage point. You do an actual personal reconnaissance in the objective area as close as you can. All of these skills are what steered me through life to keep me on track when I was disoriented, because I was never lost. Something I learned: you're never lost. You're only temporarily disoriented. If you can go back where you came from, you are not lost. I did know some people that were lost at the basic school. I remember some of those guys, boy, they made it to colonel, some of those guys.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the
Usually
basic
they
school,
are.
they were soup, total soup. They're lost. They ended up in another county, and the county sheriff had to bring them back to Camp Barrett. Wow, that's amazing. Well, no one had to do that with me. At least I knew I was only disoriented. If I was able to go back where I came from, I wasn't lost. Lost
That's
is when you end up in some other county.
that's a great message for veterans to understand that, and yeah, I think that's a great thing to recognize. So then, in that, how do you think you reinvented yourself to continue on in the military into another branch? But what was happening in College Station at the other unit?
The unit was in Houston, and it had some great men in there. We could talk about them for a while. That's another chapter.
Yeah.
But there was one of my buddies there, one of my fellow platoon commanders, who told me, because I was still looking for a full-time job. I mean, the reserves was a part-time job, and I was able to go on active duty a few times while in the reserves, to be an instructor somewhere, to be an observer somewhere, to be an evaluator somewhere, and whatever. I was trying to get a gig as an aide de camp to a general that was a friend of Colonel Ripley, and I almost got it, but didn't get it. That would have been a 1-year tour, I think it was. But none of that was really coming on. And one of my buddies one day tells me, "Hey, the Coast Guard is recruiting former officers." I'm like, I knew of the Coast Guard from my time in the Naval Sea Cadets. and I knew a lot of positive things about the Coast Guard. So for me, it was like, well, it's an opportunity to go back on active duty. Let's see what else is going on. So I contacted whoever I needed to contact to get the process going, and they were very happy to process me and recruit me. And it happened like bam, I did everything properly. It was funny. So I had to send a picture. I sent a picture in a Marine uniform. I thought I was hysterical. I went to a personal interview in a Marine uniform. They loved it. So at least in the initial experience of processing to join the Coast Guard was a very, very positive journey.
I had the same
That's not
thing.
what happened when we showed up in Yorktown, Virginia, as we
Right.
both know.
Right.
No.
Very different. Yeah, I think because the Coast Guard is so much into traditional maritime ship driving, they were trying to become more militarized in our era, and they had a lot of hiccups
They had a lot of
along
hiccups
the way.
along the
And I
way.
just think they just couldn't manage that, in many ways. And I think they still struggle. I think they resolved some of those issues during this war on terror. But I think for many, many years, their concept of management was so overwhelming that the leadership part, you couldn't really, in my opinion, graduate from the Coast Guard Academy and really get a solid understanding of what is expected of you as a leader, but more as a manager. And so, I mean, can you say some things about that, because it's interesting, like distinguishing for us leadership and management. For veterans, I see it. Pay attention to that, because when you go to the VA for services, pick out who are the leaders, who are the managers, because that's what you're going to see, as far as what you're going to get. And if you learn that early on, you're not going to get disappointed. But yeah, take it away.
When we went to the Coast Guard, we showed up in a Coast Guard that was overwhelmed with duties. They didn't have enough personnel to fulfill all the missions that they had to fulfill, all the duties that they had to perform. But that has been a staple of the Coast Guard from time immemorial. The Coast Guard is an amazing service that offers an opportunity to be in a maritime environment.
Yes.
That is very diversified. This is a service that was made up of several other agencies that used to be separate agencies before.
Yes.
And when these agencies all come together, they make this conglomerate culture. So you have what used to be the Revenue Cutter Service, which is the more military side of the Coast Guard. Then you have H2 Navigation, and you have the Rescue Service. It's all very different components, extremely different components. And then, of course, there's more to that, pollution and so forth. It's all very different cultures put together.
Yes.
They don't always come at all that well together. Is what I think happens there. But I don't know what the Coast Guard is like now. I think our experience out there, my experience there was great, but not so great. There was a lot of conflict with people, a lot of envy and jealousy, because I came from a very different background.
Me too.
So I was not able to acculturize to them.
Yes.
Here was the real conflict, was that I was not capable to acculturize to them for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Maybe I was recalcitrant. Maybe they were recalcitrant. It doesn't really matter now, but
No.
it was not easy to be fluid in that environment. We were completely opposite.
Yes. And I had heard this from others in our class who had similar kind of like combat arms experience going in. And again, this isn't for all you Coast Guard veterans out there or active duty personnel. This in no way is to discredit the Coast Guard. This is just to make a distinction, because we do know that in the war on terror, the Coast Guard has played a role in combat operations. They did that in Vietnam. They did that pretty much in all wars. But I think in the time where Master Sergeant and I were in, they were in a time where they just went back to, driving ships with also the different mini cultures that kind of clashed within this one old culture of the smaller maritime service. So it's very complex, but yeah, like I appreciate your description.
It's pretty much that. It was like a clash. Yet I was fortunate enough that I met some folks while I was in Hawaii that were just fabulous people in my life, So
Oh, tell me this before you go into that. You were also part of the famous 80s classic exercise TV show, and I'm revealing this now, not X-rated, not R-rated. It was in between G and PG, but it had very high national and worldwide attention pre-internet. Can you share a little bit about that?
that was a fascinating experience. While I was in Hawaii, this crew comes and wants to have like a fitness session on top of a patrol boat. I think that's how it was.
What was
And
the name of the show? It was world renowned, and it was a French guy who was the aerobics instructor. Let me look him up. What was his name?
I don't recall, I don't recall the name of the show. What I recall was
Because I
they were
saw
brother,
you. I saw
brother.
you on TV, USA Network.
Yeah, I remember that. There was a brother and a sister that ran the show, the fitness. Actually, I think he was Israeli.
Oh, he was
Uh,
Israeli, yeah.
he was Israeli, and he was a fantastic person, awesome personality, high motivator, and incredible fitness level. And then his sister Ada, I remember her name. I'm trying to remember his name. They were. I had the opportunity to meet with these people and spend time with them. It was just awesome. But we had a group of folks there during that, and that was great for the Coast Guard too. It was great.
It was great
Great
public
propaganda for
affairs.
the Coast Guard. So we had everyone that was fit enough was in that show.
Gilad, that was his name, right? Gilad?
I don't recall exactly. This was a long time ago, man.
Bodies in Motion was the show.
Bodies in Motion, something like that. And
I
they
had to look it up.
And they had very, very fit people in that show, man. I tell you.
Well, you were fit too, so it was great. You were keeping up with them. I could tell that they really appreciated having you. I thought from there you'd have your own show because you were, fit, lean, mean, and you were fighting maritime machine, at that particular time on that patrol boat. And yeah, the show. If
I
anybody,
think the name
X,
of the vessel was Washington, Coast Guard cutter Washington. It was a patrol boat. It's a beautiful, beautiful ship. I wasn't assigned to that vessel. I went on it a few times. Oh my God, I went on it. I got so sick, I threw up so much. It was amazing. Very humbling experience. I thought I was seaworthy, but not worthy for that boat. That vessel, that Coast Guard cutter Washington, probably decommissioned now.
Yeah.
I met some great people in Hawaii,
Okay.
and there was people out there that really valued what skills I had. I had very good skills with marksmanship. I had very good skills with convincing people of doing things. I had very good skills with drills and ceremonies. So I was the commander of the honor guard. So anytime that there was an honor guard, which was an improvised event,
Yeah.
I was able to train people, and
Yeah.
I picked some other Coast Guard personnel who knew drill a little better, honed them in, helped them to drill the way they needed to drill, which eventually I was successful doing that. Led a couple of parades. There was some very beautiful experiences and very beautiful successes, but they were small successes. They were not key successes to help me to move forward, to continue.
I experienced the same.
Of the
because
conflict.
not only that, I felt as though that since the Coast Guard at that particular time didn't really know how to integrate folks like us with our backgrounds, that we were just these generalists without getting the generalists, the foundational Coast Guard training.
Yeah, that
And
was
so we were given these different jobs that we did well, but at the same time, they weren't enough for a career because they lacked the leadership. As Patton would say, that if you're on command, you have to do everything that those following you do. And so many of these people were very high ranking, and they didn't know anything about, they were junior officers many years ago, pre-Vietnam, whatever, and they didn't really know how to organize training. Their operations were just set up for search and rescue by and large, and all these type of specific missions, but they didn't know how to take on new mentees, right? That's what the junior officer is. And I just felt that it's no crime, but it's more an issue of like recognizing, like you said earlier, knowing yourself. And I think that's where the veteran needs to always know, if you're receiving a treatment from the VA hospital, try to understand the procedures, try to know the level of experience, those who are in charge of it, the operation, those in charge of the surgery, those in charge of the department you're receiving counseling, if you're under counseling, but try to recognize how do they operationalize service, because Pedro and I are having a discussion about these different things about a institution that we value, but at the same time, we scrutinize because that's what's being objective, to not be afraid of the truth. And I just found it very interesting that, for example, myself, I could have like all these great ideas regarding the Coast Guard auxiliary to be something of a bridge between law enforcement and more for just simple reporting, to take their reports into the ops room, and use that as key information. These type of things are minimized or whatever, but you know I'm just saying that, like you said, that mismatch, they just couldn't see anything at that particular time other than, are you a good boat driver? Well, you never sent me to the school, and I didn't go to the Coast Guard Academy. I spent time learning how to jump out of planes because I took out time from Norwich, and I went into Special Operations Capable Unit Anglico. Much like you, I had certain skills, not as much as you, but I had certain basic warrior skills that I thought I would kind of come across, because at that time when we were there, Escobar was still alive. They were recruiting us pretty much, I thought, for the drug war, right? Clear and Present Danger had come out just about the time that we got commissioned, and it was just very interesting. But again, it's just interesting.
I think that we were uh, undervalued and underappreciated because we were greatly misunderstood. And at least in my case, I did not know how to toot my horn. I did not know how to advertise what things I could do.
I had too much of a big mouth, and I would do that. But that was a negative part in a way, because I wasn't very junior officer, and that got me in some trouble. But it helped me when I made, I had to make an informal whistleblower complaint. There was no formal whistleblower process at that time, or at least they hid it from us. But because maybe not on purpose, but they were just, you just whistleblower, what's that? But I felt as though I had to in some way blow the whistle on not just the treatment that I received, but the treatment that I had seen them uh kind of push on, bully enlisted personnel, and especially women and people of color. And this isn't a race thing. I just think it's more of a culture thing where they weren't used to all junior officers coming from a military background. They weren't used to women being on cutters and smaller boats, 19 footers.
they
They weren't
themselves,
used to people of color also, really
all of
kind
that
of
was
like,
new for them. All
yeah,
of that was new for them.
yeah,
They were
right.
going through a major transition,
Growing
and
pains.
they had good intentions. They had
Yes.
good intentions, but their attitudes were not yet in concert with their intentions. The intention was that, okay, we're recruiting this many personnel who are former officers, and they're women, and many of them are minorities. There was all kinds of people in our class, but they didn't really know what to do with us, and there was no real Coast Guard upbringing.
Yes.
We went through a
Shake and bake.
pretty flimsy orientation. They should have just really given us the normal Coast Guard training so that then we'd be up to par with other normal Coast Guard officers. I was able to convince some folks out there in Hawaii to let me go with the Coast Guard Cutter Rush, which was it's been decommissioned now. What a beautiful vessel that was! It was a 470-foot cutter. Oh my God, it was beautiful. And they used to do fisheries patrols in Alaska, but they were home ported in Honolulu. So I went underway with them for a couple of weeks, and on the job, I stood every conceivable watch a junior officer was supposed to stand while underway. So I learned a great deal, but it wasn't really enough to put me.
Yeah.
So we were always dealing with a gap, with a gap that we couldn't really fill. And
no matter who you were, pretty much, because you had people who spent 4 years learning the science and the art of being a Coast Guard officer, a very specific job. And we only had a couple weeks. And there were a couple people from our class that were able to stand out, but usually they either had a maritime background, or they had a command that was willing to groom them the way that
we should have been groomed.
Right. And this is no apologies, because we carried on with the mission and we proved ourselves, on so many levels after. But it's just pointing out that everywhere you go, you're going to find, unfit leadership structures, and then you're going to find those, and even in the Coast Guard, that do practice grooming and mentoring and kind of giving different people experiences instead of just pushing them in an office for 2 years, and maybe going out, at times to do very interesting things, but not really being a part of, the real nitty-gritty of it. But also being a part of being a part of the nitty-gritty, yes, there's no doubt during that time, but how can I say it? Not having the adequate training to do the nitty-gritty.
That's the key. We did not receive any adequate training other than what we found on our way on the job. Either we convinced someone to show us something, or we did it ourselves, and it was never really enough to really move it forward, But be that as it may, I was still fortunate that I've met some really good people there, some of whom were very, very gracious and very mature, and they showed me what they could, and they did what they could. And there was others that were very toxic. Everywhere you go, you have toxic fellows, and then you have to deal with them. Sometimes we become toxic ourselves as a reaction to that toxicity. That might have happened to me, actually, because at one point, maybe I was afforded an opportunity that I was so I was so disappointed at that point that I didn't even see the opportunity, so I opted to shy from it. That's just it's all gone in the hogwash now, but
Yeah. And,
but
and
but
so, and so
but
the
it's
after
those
the
lessons. It's those
yeah,
lessons.
it's just those lessons. And then we both went on, to greener pastures or less greener pastures, but
A little bit of
nonetheless, we were
both.
still green. Yeah, a little bit of both, but at least they were green, those pastures, and not purple. But anyway, what, after that, where did that take you?
Well, I was not able to continue with the Coast Guard because I had been,
Not many of us in our class
you
did.
know,
Yeah,
there's a that in itself is a bunch of other stories, but that's okay.
yeah,
In the end, I needed to get out of there.
yes,
At that point in my journey, I was disappointed with so many different things. That what I wanted was to just completely go to a whole different situation. I actually ended up in the French Foreign Legion for a short time,
oh
uh,
wow, really?
but I didn't stay there. But
Yeah,
I did go and began the process as it was in the early '90s, which
wow.
is not anything as it is now. It's changed a whole lot. The outfits units change a great deal.
How was the French Foreign Legion different? Can you say that? Because I think many people just remember the movie Stand Up and Die or something, the one March or Die, right?
March or die.
Yeah,
That's
from
a,
the
that,
70s. Brilliant movie.
that's they portray the Foreign Legion of the 1920s.
Yeah,
Very different situation.
yeah. But what was that like? There's so much mystique in the Legion, and what was your reason for saying I'm
I
going to
was
head
not
back?
determined to stay, so therefore I didn't. But
Right.
I went back some other time. I did stay longer.
Um,
But my experience there was actually very positive. But that was because I wanted to be a part of that. Although I realized I wasn't 100% decided in giving my life up. You really
Right.
have to give your
Yeah,
life up.
you have to give your life up. Yeah.
You literally have to give your life up. And at that point, I decided not to stay there. Went back to Puerto Rico.
Do you feel that the
Joined
training
the
just
National Guard in Puerto Rico.
wow. Well, what with the Legion back then, can you tell us a little bit about like would you say the training, I mean, were you able to handle the training?
I was
what,
in the
what was
selection process. I didn't begin the training, the actual as it was back then. As it
yes.
was back then, uh, things have changed a great deal. But when I went through there, uh, you were screened.
Yes. I heard
Uh,
about this
you were screened,
extensively.
and if they would see that you have potential, then they will let you remain at your recruiting station, the one you reported to. I went to Fort Jean, which was in the outskirts of Paris, and it's an old little fortress, kind of like a medieval fortress that's out there in the middle of nowhere. It's just fascinating stuff. And then when they had enough candidates, then they grouped us together and sent us by train to Marseille. And on Marseille, we would take a bus, a Legion bus, to Oban, and Oban
Yes.
is like
Elban, yes. That's the
the
major train.
headquarters.
Yes. As a kid, I
Begin
wrote
your
I,
sele-
I wrote Oban. I said I want to be a Legionnaire. I wrote after I saw the movie. I never got a response back, but yeah, it was
you
Oban.
you begin your selection process really from the moment you show up. But when you are in Oban, that's the more uh, in-depth selection process. But at that time, the way they were doing things, it took weeks and weeks and weeks. They had you wait uh, for the battery of tests that you had to take were at random, and that actually motivated people to leave.
Yes, yes, yeah.
And a lot of people that perhaps could have been good legionnaires left because they were tired of waiting. But at the time, and the mindset of the legion of that time, I said that's part of the selection. to disorient people out here. You never knew what was the system. You never knew what was going to happen on any given day. I later on in life encountered a very similar environment when I went to selection at Camp McCall with the Army Special Forces. You never knew what the heck was going on. Only when it was posted on the board did you knew something vaguely. But that's how life is. And as a veteran, there was a lot of things I did not know when I was between tours of duty, or when I was in the street, when I was almost homeless, or perhaps homeless and not homeless because there was another veteran who gave me a roof. And so all of this, everything ties on to how I spared myself, or how God gave me the grace to be spared from my darkest moments, dealing with trauma, dealing with loss, dealing with trying to keep your dignity when everybody else is trying to take it from you. But in the Legion, I saw that environment that I saw again later on in the Army at selection.
Let's
Where there was all this uncertainty, all of this
Yeah.
uncertainty,
right.
all this uncertainty.
But also you've got to admit, because I found this out, you know, I was in the military 4 times, very similar to you. You were in the military more, but I noticed that as a 40-year-old man, I was definitely not the man that I was a 20-year-old man. So I accepted, you know, that you know, I can go on combat missions, but I'm definitely not, I'm just not the same. You know, my reflexes are different. You know, it's like being an athlete. And so anytime you're going through, you know, and when you're with a crack unit, they're going to make demands, but you're not like someone who's 20 years younger. And you had to experience that too, even going through the Legion and all that. So you know, as someone who's worked on not only with regular combat arms and been in combat arms, but is also a clinician tied to working with military personnel and veterans, I can honestly say that your pursuits, even in the Coast Guard, are as much, you know, to take back your rank. You know, the Coast Guard's very proud, small service. So they weren't going to give you your Marine Corps rank. You had to start off as an ensign, you know,
and you have to take that. You have to take that. You have to take that with humility. You have to take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
And that's how everything was. When I was applying for some things with the VA, at some point the VA tells me, you were not in combat. You did not do any of these things. I'm like, I was not in combat. Okay. I did not do any of these things. So I found a picture of me somewhere in the middle of nowhere. I said, so what, you think this was a picnic? And then I realized that you deal sometimes with people, maybe there was envy and jealousy from someone who might have been in the service, but did not have the kind of experiences I had. Maybe,
or
maybe
lost paperwork. I know when I transitioned out of the Coast Guard, they had included all these years, like active years. And I had said, they had seen that I had active time, but I had reserve time. And so I was like, how do you, you know, get this changed? And it's just like a long process, but initially, if you got it right, you'd be better off. And I think maybe what you experienced and what I know other veterans have experienced is that as you exit out, I mean, people don't tell you, but you find out later that they screw up on your citations, your paperwork, on missing forms, on, you know, and it always is that most important form, like the issue of you know, that section as far as like your unit records and stuff. But like, you know, for other people, it's like that important back appointment that they had while they were on active duty that's just not there, but it did happen. Or some of my PT scores that I said I know I was upper 290s and stuff, and it's like I could never get that Marine Corps 18 minutes 3-mile run, but I got all the others. And then someone said, "Oh, you're I don't know." They said, "I'm a class 2 swimmer." I said, "Class 2?" I'm like, I swim like a fish. I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't get it. And I even pride myself to this day. I purposely hit the pool to this day to keep my standard. You know, I do 2 miles. This wasn't the Marine Corps standards, but you know, I do 2 miles and I still can do 2 miles in under an hour. And
That's
but
pretty good.
but I guess, yeah, and and my best was like 38 minutes or something like that. 38, 35 minutes, 2 miles. I get what you're saying. That's what I'm saying. I'm bragging here and opening my big mouth to kind of like affirm everything that you just said, that you're going to have people that are going to say, well, what kind of career did you have? Or you weren't in combat. They make these assumptions. And I
Yeah.
guess for our veteran community, it's important for veterans to say, as my professor once said, the late great Patricia Cranton, you know, check out the domain. Don't focus so much on the person, you know, in front of you, you know, making criticisms, whether direct or indirect. And so that's what I add into my interpretations, you know,
Dealing
of
with the bureaucracy
yes,
sometimes is just like dealing with toxic leadership.
yes, toxic leadership. Yeah.
The bureaucracy, it can be pretty blind and even cruel for not knowing any better. And you
Yes.
have this uh, officials, this persons, this clerks, this scribes that do this work, and sometimes they're very well trained, sometimes they're not, and they're still human beings. They're human beings
Mm,
that are affected by whatever has happened to them the night before, or whatever
yes.
did not happen to them the night before. And
Yes.
they have issues themselves. And
Yes.
but several times some of my things were rejected. I'm like, this is unbelievable. And then you have to present proof that wasn't present. I have There was no proof for missions or gigs that were
Yeah.
classified or were
Yeah.
not conventional.
But by that time, didn't they realize? I mean, you already had the spearhead. You were on you were on special forces missions to have the patch on the right, right?
Well, for you get a combat patch just to be in a combat zone. But
Right. Right. But you got like didn't you got like a special forces, you worked with special forces, right?
yes, I did.
Right. And so this
But
is what
I was not a special forces qualified soldier. I never
no,
completed.
but no, I get it. But I
But
know
I
a lot of
was
people
in a special forces battalion and a special forces group. I was with several of them, and I was
exactly.
actually on an ODA. I was on several ODAs as a support soldier, which is
Wow. Yeah.
not the norm.
It's
Not the
not the
norm.
norm and not
You're
easy.
an exceptional person and you
Yes.
understand what to do.
Yeah.
You can do it.
You're
You can
part
fill
of
in
it.
some gaps. I was very fortunate. That was
Yeah.
a great privilege. Great privilege. Met some awesome people in Seventh Group while I
Mhm,
was out there at Fort Bragg in 2002.
mhm.
And then I hooked up with them again in 2003 while I was in Colombia.
Wow. Wow.
And that was essentially I was with Seventh Group 2002 and 2003, and that was
Amazing.
extraordinary
Oh, it's
experience.
interesting. You end up in Colombia with Army Special Forces and not the Coast Guard.
Not
So
the
you
Coast
had
Guard.
which got the big name for Colombia doing operations there. Right?
That sounds like in the end I ended up going to Colombia anyway.
Yeah, you end up, yeah. Just like Elvis saying, I've never been to heaven, but I was born in Oklahoma and I don't even remember. And so I wish I could sing it for you, but I'll spare you the bad tunes. Yeah.
So it's interesting. So there is that guy. I remember some guy that I met. So, oh, your career has been so convoluted. I say, and I could tell he was envious and jealous. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good way to describe it. But I think to myself, little do you know, all of what I had to go through, all of what I had to overcome, all of the things that I had to deal with that you would have never successfully completed.
That's right.
But leave it at that. So it's sometimes best to be quiet. They say choose your weapons and choose your field. When you're going on a duel, choose your weapons and choose your field if
And
you
I
can.
think I think veterans need to learn that because you don't have to fight every battle. Don't yell at every nurse that gets it wrong, at the hospital. Don't if you're working at a job, so what if you're all tabbed out and you went to this school and that school and you were the prima donna, or you were a stellar officer, and now, people, you're working for, Merrill Lynch or something as a first level kind of guy or gal. Just kind of don't make assumptions. Recognize that what you learned in the military, that even the top special operations guy or the top General Milley, or they all had to start from a junior position. And that's in the veteran journey. What I think a lot of veterans get wrong is they want to represent themselves as they were in the military by and large, or they want to fake not fake, but they're a little lost
maybe.
and disoriented in a sense that maybe they perceive themselves a certain way in the military, or a certain way they wanted to perceive themselves. And then in the veteran terrain, they're very toxic because they take on, some type of commander's type of position in a nonprofit or at the VA hospital tied to veteran issues. And yet they don't know the terrain, they're trying to work off some things from the past. And then you have those people that went first in their class in West Point and whatever, they were with Ranger Battalion and then Ranger Regiment, and then they end up at the VA and they expect that they have the same position, but they don't have the same position. You know what I mean? And not only that, they have to understand that they're civilians, that even Joe Schmuckatelli, who was admin, has just the same rights as a veteran as that operator and the fellow operator. And I just wish in our veteran terrain, it's great to learn from you, because you could have been a real jerk. And like I said, there were times where I know I failed people. I looked the other way because of what I experienced at a certain time. Towards the end of the Coast Guard, I just had enough, and there was a real bad experience with some of their operations that they had with detainees, and I just looked the other way and did not maybe fully exercise being an officer. I was in an ethical dilemma, and took many years to admit that. But like you, I look at the many great things that I was a part of, the times that I did properly, ethically act. I remember those times as well. And the good and the bad and the ugly and the misfit is a great, great tune as far as recognizing the misfits around us that in many ways at times rubbed off on us. But I'm just wondering, after your military career, when I ask this regarding leadership, and we're looking back as far as the lives in the different branches of the service, because let's just start off with looking at what some of the branches of the service kind of like pursue. And I'd like to get kind of like your commentary on that, because it's just interesting, because we have experienced very, very interesting lives. And so I know the Navy, they look at leadership. We'll start off with the Navy. People always start off with the Army. We'll start off with the Navy. And we know the Marine Corps could be first, but I don't want to show bias. But we'll start off with the Navy.
Anchors away.
Yeah, anchors away. So in the Navy, they believe in leadership as something that's tied to initiative, accountability, integrity, and toughness. And they say that it's the guiding from their website, navy.mil. It's the criteria for the naval maritime person to make decisions and actions. And then through those attributes, those values, they're led to honor, courage, and commitment. What are your thoughts on that?
They're not just basic values. These things are deeply rooted in naval traditions and naval history. United States Navy has a very rich history of success, of dealing with adversity.
Exactly.
Dealing with adversity in the worst of places, in the worst of circumstances, and they instill
continuously
at all times. When you're at sea, and some of that happens in the Coast Guard too, especially when you're at sea, anything can happen.
Yes.
And when you're on their way in a naval vessel, in a United States naval vessel, in a state's warship, the discipline has to be at its best. People cannot be asleep on their watch. The watch standards have to do. Everyone has a job, and regardless of what job you have, you still need to stand certain watches at different places at different times, because everyone has to do these things. And there's what they call all hands operations. Everybody's involved, and the safety is a constant concern. The safety is a constant concern. The having to navigate that vessel is a constant concern. Having to keep that vessel secure from aggression is a constant concern. We live in an era where aggression can come in a small-sized drone. So they're doing is to instill in young men and women that join in the Navy, or in those who have been in the Navy, for the former sailors out there, is a continuum for life. It's a continuum for life. If you take this and internalize those values will help you carry through life. And again, what values were instilled in me and the faith that I have in God combined is really what has helped me to steer in the face of great adversity, in the face of toxic leadership, in the face of toxic bureaucracy, in the face of abject rejections and misinterpretations of things that were not as they were, but as they are. And then me having to justify, me having to muster the courage to not be angry, but rather muster the courage to sit down and compose a letter addressed to someone, to an office, to a department, and explaining this is what happened, this is what it is, this is what evidence I have, and here I have a letter of someone else to support that, and having to do this, going through this painful exercise. But it took a great deal of discipline, but it was those values that were imparted early on, the same values that the Navy is talking about. They're very universal.
Yes. So we'll go on. We're done with the Navy. We'll go on to the Army. All you Army personnel, we haven't forgotten you. And so in the Army, they look at leadership from Army Doctrine Publication ADP 6-0, Mission Command and Control of Army Forces. And so they encourage commanders and support and subordinates to consider these 7 principles. And I'd like you to reflect and give a sharing of those reflections on competence, mutual trust, shared understanding, commander's intent, mission orders, and a disciplined initiative. So what are your thoughts on these different traits?
In the Navy in general, they're a lot more technical than the Army. And what one can tell here, you can tell, so the Army is more on the ground. They're more on the ground than anything else. And of course, these are the leadership traits that are primarily expound to the conventional Army. We see this in special operations, the special operations forces. SOF people do the same, but it's a different environment in the SOF community because people are generally older, they've been around a bit longer, and they are meant and trained and shaped and formed to operate independently with little or no supervision whatsoever. And the conventional Army, the larger Army, people used to call it the mother Army, things are not as independent as they are in the SOF community. And people require a lot more supervision. And you can see how they need to spend more time supervising folks than you would in the SOF community. It's just a different kind of animal.
Yes.
but the roots of the principles are the same.
Yeah.
They're the same, and they provide the same effect for people to have it's like a compass. It gives you a compass so that you can find your azimuth. You can find your direction as to where you're going, where are you heading, where are you heading. All of these leadership principles or principles of leadership are elements of a compass to help people navigate through their time in the armed forces. But this is the same that you need to navigate in life, in your normal life as a veteran once you depart the armed forces.
Mm-hmm.
These same principles are again what gave me the steel to regain my composure, and rather than being angry, frustrated, disappointed, and intoxicated myself with negativity, took a coolness under fire, to be cool, to be calm, to be collected, so that I would deal with the issues of rejection, issues of people taking your dignity away from you, issues from bureaucracy and toxic managers, toxic evaluators, things, because there are human people just like we are.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually I was able to succeed because of this same principles that were passed on. The same from the Navy, the same from the Army.
Yeah.
They're not the exact same words, but they have the same effect.
They have the same
effect.
they have the same effect. It's just maybe the words are different because of the mission, and like you said, maybe the Navy's more looking at technical things because of ship and these different operations. They may involve a little bit more technical knowledge because of the equipment factor, and so that's why they would kind of word things in that kind of way. So it's really interesting that we're making those distinctions. Now, how about the when thinking about the Air Force, another technical type of situation. Now they're interesting because what they expect from their airmen is that you have job proficiency, initiative, adaptability, inclusion and teamwork, emotional intelligence, communication, stewardship, accountability, decision making, and innovation. Now, I always admire the Air Force because they always had the better chow, the better places, the better birthing positions. Their officers were usually more eloquent, and I just think this statement right here says a lot.
I'm like, I can't believe emotional intelligence. My God, I didn't come across emotional intelligence till I went to seminary for my master's degree.
Right.
For a master's degree, okay? I'm like, whoa, emotional intelligence, the Air Force. Bravo for the Air Force. I take my hat off. I mean, I take my shirt off.
I take my hat off.
Join the Air Force, man.
I'm telling you, if my son wants to go into the military, just hearing this, I'm just saying,
the Air
hey,
Force, man.
go, aim high.
That statement. If you read, anyone who reads that statement, who at least has been exposed to some of these things, I'm like, emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Whoa.
How that would change innovation. Yeah.
Innovation. I said the Army couldn't possibly speak like that.
No. Stewardship, even stewardship, right?
They're like they are in a different plateau of understanding.
Yes.
But it comes with the territory.
Yes.
It comes with the territory.
Yeah.
When I have worked with the Air Force, and I had the distinct professional pleasure of having worked with the Air Force on various occasions, and even attended several Air Force schools.
Oh, so tell me about it. Yeah. Did you notice these values?
Well, in the 70s and the 80s, the Air Force was, as usual, ahead of everybody.
Yeah, they are always ahead.
Always ahead. They're always forward and ahead and far out of anyone else when it comes to dealing with issues, dealing with any issue. But of course, I wasn't aware of this leadership statements I don't know they had them like that back in the 80s or
No,
in the
no, no. This
70s,
is
in the 80s when I went to Air Force schools. I went to Air Force schools at Keesler Air Force Base in 79. Oh my
you
God, that
felt
was a
some
lot
of
of
this.
years.
You felt some of this advanced. Yeah,
They were. Like I remember being in an Air Force barracks and the first sergeant there, the Air Force first sergeant, the way they treated their personnel was in a very, very mature way.
right.
There wasn't any screaming or yelling or forceful leadership on its side. There was no need for that. We're dealing with mature technicians
Yeah,
and mature, highly trained personnel who are experts in their craft. And
I
that's how
think.
they were treated. That's
Yeah,
how they were treated.
I think that what's his name? It's interesting. That great recon Marine Roger Sparks, who you know, left the Marine Corps, and he was, he went through a lot of the different great schools, and then he successfully completed his time in the Marine Corps, and then he ends up becoming, this pararescueman who becomes a legend and as a pararescueman, and he just stayed and just you could see his passion as being the Marine in him, like I see the Marine in you, but he ended up, you know, getting all these medals for all his heroism as being a pararescueman, and those guys, they can be, as far as I know, they're so trained they can be doctors, they can get an
They're the
MD
ultimate
just
warrior. Those PJs are the ultimate warrior. I mean, I don't know how people sometimes have their nerve to take a rap on the Air Force. I'm like, boy, you really don't know what you're talking
you
about.
don't
I'm mental, man.
there's like five different special operations, and
Yeah.
they're the most funded. They have a
Yeah.
weather special operation group, they have
Mhm.
combat controllers, they have tactical, coordinators that are still considered, special operations capable. They have a lot of the SEER, all the SEER guys, their Air Force. They have, just like you said, definitely overlooked in regards
Overlooked,
to.
undervalued, and underappreciated, and
Yeah,
only understood by those who have seen them at work.
yes,
I have
yeah.
been fortunate enough to have seen some of these folks at work. Oh my God. I mean, talk about impressive, man. I've never met any PJ that I wouldn't, come
Are
on.
you serious? Do
Those
you
guys
really?
were like the epitome
Yeah,
of, of
you
special
got
operations.
you felt that, right? You felt
Yep.
that. Hmm. Yeah,
Unbelievable.
yeah,
Um,
that's incredible. So now we go on to
the Air Force
our
is really good at that. Always forward, always
always forward.
forward.
Yeah,
I love that. Emotional intelligence. Could the
yeah,
Army come up with that?
yeah, yeah,
The Marine Corps is
and
never going to come up
you
with
know, and as veterans, we have to learn this in many ways, as far as dealing with our families, in our friends. Uh, if we get a certain something, if we get some goodies from the American Legion, it's not just about yourself. You know, you got to have the emotional intelligence to recognize, hey, there's a fellow buddy vet that, just like you said before about, going through your transition and knowing another vet. And I feel that way with certain vets, but there's just some vets that just, it's just all about what they can get out of the community or about themselves. And I'm not saying they're doing it on purpose. I'm sure there's a lot of pain tied to that, either pre-military pain or pain that they received in the military,
or even
or
post.
pain that they received after the military, that they
Yeah.
feel as though they need to get theirs out of the veteran community and really ignore the group. And that wouldn't really happen by and large in a lot of the active military components because of all the values that we're talking about.
I think well, I know from having been through some of it myself, it's a very painful transition. I mean, it's a very painful transition, and I had to go through this transition several times in my life. Like one day I'm a company commander in the Marine Corps. I was a company commander for a headquarters company as a first lieutenant,
Mhm.
uh, and I'm in charge of like 300 people, all kinds of. I mean, it was amazing responsibility, and I was doing fairly well for the short time that I was doing that. And then, boom, I'm out in the street,
Mhm.
and suddenly I have no dignity. I have nothing. I have no career. I have, it's like, wow. And at the same time, going through a divorce, so I'm suddenly blatantly poor. All the money is gone
Right.
because the lady took all the
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
And you're like poor and homeless.
Hmm.
And nobody cares anymore that you were a Texas A&M graduate,
Hmm.
that you were a Marine infantry officer, that
Officer.
you used to be a company commander, platoon commander, whatever. None of that matters anymore. All that matters is more or less how you look. If you carry yourself with certain propriety and you look visible. But if you look scroggy, if you look worn out, then they're gonna treat you like you're scroggy and worn out.
Right.
And,
Right.
and that's how society is. That's how the world is. The world treats you the way you look, the way you are, the way you sound. And then sometimes you have to metamorphosize into, you
Yes.
have to be a little bit of a chameleon, So
Yes.
you're no longer in the Marine Corps, you're no longer in the Army, you're not the NCOIC that you
Right.
used to be,
That's
whatever.
right.
Now you have to take a whole lot of humble pie, like we used to say. You have to take a whole lot of humble pie
Hmm.
and start the ropes again. And that is a very painful experience, a very painful transition. And I went through that on multiple occasions in my life.
Hmm.
And it was never easy and it was never not painful. It was always painful.
Right.
And it seems each time it was painful in a different way. And each time I had to learn something again, or I had to relearn some other thing. And then I had to learn something new. And each time you have to assess everything that you're made of or everything that you think you're made of and find out what else is it that you're really made of.
Yes. I think that's beautifully said for the veteran community. You younger vets, we're not saying this in a condescending way. We're just saying that this is a reality. Don't give up. You know, recognize that even the human body experiences this, in transition, that it's even difficult, even in going through a fasted state. I feel, great mental clarity, but I've fasted for 7 days, and it's the body that's basically pushing. As Aristotle said, nature makes no errors. And it's true. In this fasted state, I could go on for a couple more days. I'm going to quit because I think my cauliflower pizza is calling me in a couple hours,
That's a good one.
zero net carbs,
That's a good one. That's a good
yeah,
one.
yeah,
And you, because you can.
because I
Today,
can.
tonight, you can. Under other circumstances, you didn't have this choice, and you
Yes.
had to keep pushing. You had to keep pushing, and that perhaps that's one thing I was able to do. Just kept pushing, because that's what I knew. I knew to keep pushing,
And yeah.
not give up, not
So
give up
that's
on
what
myself,
you
to
would
not give
say
up
that for
on.
veterans. You would say
Yes,
that. Yeah.
do not give up on yourself. Do not give up on the system. The system is not perfect, but the system is there to support you. It supported me,
Mhm.
not always as I needed it, but eventually it did. Once I began to learn how to ask questions,
Yes.
to the right people. How do I go about this? How do I go about that? And I understand that you cannot always do all the fighting yourself. Sometimes you need to get yourself someone from the VFW, or
Yeah.
someone from the American
Yeah.
Legion, or someone to help you, a representative, someone to give you a little bit of guidance.
Yeah.
And
Because they may have something that you don't know. And here's a concept that I'm developing, and that's Lance Armstrong's Dr. Spencer, his cornerman coach. He calls himself a cornerman. And I said, you're making me think of this concept of that I'm developing, the whole thing of the, sometimes we're not going to find our cornermen. For example, the way I met you, it was fleeting, but I felt deeply inspired by your words in that short period of time 30 years ago. And yet I had a cornerman moment, you had your life. I think sometimes we think of mentors and we think of guides as far as people that have to be there for the long haul. But how about if we're attuned, like you and I have had to be, into our situations and get what we can in a affirming, positive, good way from those wise ones and carry on with the mission and get
Yeah,
off
that's
their
what you have
feet.
to do. You were given a frag order. You were given a frag order. You were not given a full order. You're given a frag order, and you glean what is the commander's intent, and then you perform. And that's life. Life is like that. Life is like that. The mentors I had, they were wonderful, but they were only there for a season, and it was a short season. The time I was with Colonel Ripley was not as long as I would have liked it to be. I was able to stay in touch with him over the years. I was able to see him years and years later. In 2005, when I was working for a short time with the DIA in Crystal City, outside of the
Wow,
Pentagon,
amazing.
and it was just an unbelievable opportunity, to be with this great man. And then suddenly, a few years later, he dies. So, I treasure those moments I had with Colonel John W. Ripley, who was truly a great man in his time and for time immemorial, and a Marine Corps legend.
Yeah,
A lot of people don't even know about him,
yeah,
but
but
that
you were
really
able to get a
imparted a lot of
taste. Yeah, you
values.
were able to get a taste, and a lot of people don't appreciate the taste. They want, they expect, someone like a Spencer, a Dr. Spencer, like what he did with Lance Armstrong. And it's like, I'm saying, if that's available, go for it. But
That's
that's not going to
unlikely.
happen. That's,
It's
yeah,
unlikely.
yeah,
It's unlikely. People get transferred. You get transferred. People move.
exactly.
You move. You lose their email. They change their phone number. You change your phone number. You
Yeah,
change your email, or it gets canceled or whatever. Uh, in an era where there was none of those things, it was already complicated to stay in touch with anyone. When it was just letters, that's all we had, letters.
yeah. So
And now that we
veterans,
have all these mechanisms,
yeah,
it's still equally complicated.
yes. And that's why I would say veterans, look at your possible learning moments from these mentors and keep accountable of your own expectations. Now, what's kind of interesting is the whole thing with I'm sorry, can you end that section as we go on to the Coast Guard leadership model?
What was the Coast Guard leadership model?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, the
What
one
was it
that's,
back then? I imagine that now is different.
well, now it's
I'm
very
pretty
different.
sure
Yeah.
that we're talking, it was a long time ago. I
Yeah.
am certain they must have evolved a
They,
great, they
I
must have
think
evolved a great
I
deal.
think they had to, but right before we go into that, I didn't want to be the last word on that concept that we were talking about. But yeah, to finally extend some of that in regards to what you were going to say after talking about, yeah, that it's unlikely that you're not going to maybe find that Obi-Wan Kenobi. So what can you do?
That doesn't always happen. It's in the end, it's you in the mirror. And
Wow.
that's what Colonel Ripley used
Wow.
to tell me. Colonel
Yeah.
Ripley used to tell me, say, hey, Lieutenant, uh, it's all, it's you. It's you. Are you at peace with yourself? Do you accept yourself? Because
Wow.
that's what it's all about. No one is going to thank you. You may not even get the medal. There was a lot of medals I never got.
Mhm.
There was medals I was recommended for that were actually rescinded by some envious and jealous toxic leader.
Mhm.
And then later someone else put me in again for another medal, and I got them anyway, and they were signed by a general instead of by a colonel. So you see, there's always justice. There's always justice. There was a lot of things that are taken away from you, but if you're honest, if you're sincere, they will be given to you by someone else.
Right.
So Colonel Ripley, he had this great wisdom. He was a great Christian too. He was a devout Catholic to the hilt, to the hilt. He will do Hail Marys while he was under the bridge at
Mhm.
Donha.
Oh,
That
wow.
was unbelievable, unbelievable situation.
Vietnam War. Yeah.
Yeah, and he
Yeah.
would tell me, no one's going to thank you for doing what you had to do. You had to thank yourself. You'd be lucky if your wife thanks you or your family thanks you,
Mhm.
or you have some good peers that don't backstab you. I
Mhm.
mean, this was like
Yeah.
hardcore truth.
Yeah.
You had to accept yourself, value yourself. Value yourself.
Yeah, that's a
Value.
great message. That's the great message as we transition to the next service and then the final service. Um, the Coast Guard, yeah, it's had to go through a lot of evolution, and I think the change from the last change from Department of Transportation to Homeland Security may have helped make the change in this new war on terror. But
Better,
how they define
better mix.
leadership, yeah, how they define leadership is this, and I'll let you expound on and reflect on this. But leadership involves working with and influencing others to achieve common goals. Coast Guard members interact with others in many ways, whether as superior, mentor, manager, team member, team leader, peer, or worker. Positive professional relationships provide a foundation for the success of our service.
Oh,
Now,
that's a major
even
evolution.
that's exactly. I was ready to say that. I said they didn't even do as they have the icing like the Air Force, but really it didn't come out like that Air Force message, in my opinion. I may be wrong, but I just think that that's a big that's I don't know. I found myself lost in that. Just
I think
because
you
of
want
their
to include
mission. Their
everything.
mission is so important,
Mhm.
and yet it's almost as if you're hearing something from Merrill Lynch, you know?
They might still be struggling with some identity, but I think the Coast Guard could have a more profound leadership statement than that.
Yes.
Maybe something in concert with what the Air Force has, not a copy of it, but something in concert because it'll be comparable. The Coast Guard is also a very technological, very
Yes.
technical environment where folks prided themselves in being an expert in their craft, in their
Yes.
rating, and they require little or no supervision whatsoever.
That's true.
Once they were rated properly, my God, man, you would
Yeah.
talk to a quartermaster in the Coast Guard, that guy, that man, that woman, they were
Knew the
top notch.
manual in and out.
They just knew their Bautic tables. They knew everything, man. It was like impressive, impressive. So I don't see why they have such a kind of
Yeah.
flimsy, even kind of leadership statement there. Not to bring a pun here or anything like that. I'm all about Coast Guard Semper Paratus.
Yeah.
Never mind what things didn't go well
Yeah.
over there. It doesn't matter. The
Yeah.
Coast Guard is an awesome place to be. So they should have a much stronger leadership
Yeah.
statement than that.
Right.
Something in concert with the Air Force, which in fact the Coast Guard likes to emulate the Air Force a great deal in their agency-like environment.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe someone didn't come up. Someone was not supervised when they wrote this.
And they wrote this, or they hired
So
someone to
they
write it.
subcontracted.
Yeah.
It's got some good elements, because
Yeah.
it
It
seems they
does.
want to bring in this like totality, everything
Yeah.
together. So that's positive. That's good. But
Yeah.
it ought to be a bit more, a stronger punch in there.
Punch. Yeah.
Stronger punch in there. And
I
the
think
Coast Guard,
you're right, because
when the
all these
Coast Guard
coast.
goes on a raid, they do
Yeah.
punch. A lot of
They
people
do.
don't know that.
Yeah.
You've
They
seen a
do.
Coast Guard raid. Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. And
That's
so.
the most powerful law enforcement agency in the planet. A lot of
Yeah.
people forget.
Yeah.
A lot of people-
With military, what's beautiful about a Coast Guard uh uh enlistment or a Coast Guard commission is that whether you're a junior officer or an E4, this is quite interesting because the Marine Corps has this mentality, but technically you're supposed to be military, but you are registered. Even an E4 in any rate or a junior officer, you're still considered a federal law enforcement officer. So you have at the rank of E4, you are by Congress, uh, you
authorized to
know,
enforce laws and regulations at sea
yes. Yeah.
or in the
So
coast.
yeah, it's a great thing that in many ways, like you said earlier about that great Marine Ripley, and you've got to see yourself. So COSIs, when you're in readjustment, just because you may not be featured like all the other branches of the service, take pride in what you did, in the unit that you were a part of. And it may not be a traditional military unit, but know that you are still part of a military branch. And unlike the other branches, you're also a law enforcement officer. And, if you reach, E4, and even if you don't, if you left the Coast Guard before then, you're still a part of that, supporting that. Uh, and so I think that's a very noble thing to have.
It's a great deal of authority that they're given, especially when that comes more to bear with those Coast Guard personnel when they get to attend the boarding school. I was privileged to attend the boarding officer course. Whoa, man! I tell you, that course was comprehensive. I mean, you come out of there, you are a maritime law enforcement officer for
Wow,
real. And
that's great.
that was at Yorktown again, but that was some of the really good things that happened to the Coast Guard. That was one
Yeah,
of them.
that's great. That's
That
great.
was awesome. That was
Going, that's great. Now going to our last military service, and that's the United States Marine Corps. And uh its principles are quite interesting, and what they look at, and these are the major ones. I mean, they have, of course, the Marine Corps is the smallest, but they have 11, so there's more than the others. And maybe you can explain that. I can't too, but I'd like folks to hear it from you. But know yourself and seek self-improvement, be technically and tactically proficient, know your Marines and look out for their welfare. Keep your Marines informed, like Sun Tzu said in Sun Tzu's first principle. Set the example, ensure the task is understood, supervised, and accomplished. Again, Sun Tzu. Train your Marines as a team. And gosh, it goes on and on and on. Let's start off with what I just, oh, well, uh,
they added some new ones in there.
yeah, I'm gonna complete that.
Maybe a
Train,
long time ago, but I
train,
wasn't aware.
train your Marines as a team. This is what we didn't receive in the Coast Guard. Again, this isn't blaming anybody, but we were used to a culture where
Mhm.
you're, even as a Marine officer, you had to go to TBS. People who went to Harvard, A&M, Norwich, Yale,
Everybody,
they
everybody
just
went to the
go,
basic
they have
course.
that British model and the Roman model of putting all officers in an extended period of training together. And so everyone gets that same experience and has no excuse not having one type of officer go through that training, another type
No,
going,
everybody went to the basic course.
yeah, and
And that
that
created a
gives you,
common point of departure.
right,
Common point of
it
departure.
gives equality, it gives all the, equity, inclusion, and diversity in its truest sense, right? Because
Yes,
you're all starting at the same point, right? It's
yes.
probably one of the few government, definitely more than any private institution, but one of the few government uh institutions where you have that. It's quite interesting. And let's say the final five or four is: make sound and timely decisions, develop a sense of responsibility among your subordinates, employ your command in accordance with its capabilities, seek responsibility and take responsibility for your actions. Now, I don't want to sound biased, but I am. At first, I was thinking these 11 principles, gosh, they make sense. They make sense.
Do. They do. Of course, it's easier for us to make that they make sense for us because we're both former Marines.
Right.
And but to live by these principles and apply them as much as possible every day of your life, that is a life raft.
Yeah. Good
That
point.
is a life raft. That is a sounding board to apply those principles to yourself. Let's again, we'll go back to Colonel Ripley said, look yourself in the mirror and value yourself.
Yeah.
It comes to self-esteem, self-esteem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes it happens a great deal when you're between deployments or you're between tours of duty. You're out in the street and that happened to me several times in my life. Several times in my life, I lost everything I had, or almost everything I had, to journey of divorce and calamities, etc. And to survive that, that takes a great deal of effort.
Yeah.
A lot of people
I'm
just
just, yeah,
depart.
they don't look at that. I'm just more disguised. You know, I end up going to a monk and being a monk, and people say, I heard one, you know, a friend of the family said, uh, how do you establish credit as a monk? And you know, at first I got angry, but I thought he's right, because when I left, you know, I was couch surfing, you know, until I could find a job, and I was couch surfing, and you know, it was just really interesting. And I said, you know, once I landed easily back into the government, but you know, it was still a challenge, but I say easy because of my background. You know, that's the only the technical background, as far as having the psychoanalytic background, that's the only thing that saved me. But it was still hard to be out there, right? To couch surf
Yes.
and to be vulnerable, right? Because I had not signed anything with the government yet, you know, and I was waiting and I was waiting. And you know, the government, it takes a long time. So here I am couch surfing, but recognizing that there's something more to all of this, like you said, about the self. And it's very scary. And so when you, as a, and I, as a veteran, and others, yeah, we're out of the military, like me being a monk, where can like a E4, E3, even if you're a corporal, really establish great credit? You get things going on with life, you can't. And so that gave me more of a drive when I got on the government to put money into my thrift savings plan immediately to really catch up, because I had 10 years of being a monk. So that set me back in life. Not that I was homeless for those 10 years, but I ended up in this very difficult position where you could say I was technically under the US government standard for homelessness. If you're couch surfing, that's still classified. One can
That is
classify
homeless.
themselves.
That is
Yes,
homeless. If you're
yes,
not paying rent for your own flat, you're pretty much homeless.
yeah, yeah. And so catching up, I figured I needed to work two jobs while I was back in the government, something on the side. And people were saying, "Well, why are you that? You're equivalent to captain." Before I ended up making equivalent to major, I was just like, no, because I need to catch up, because I spent 10 years, you know, kind of in a monk, being a monk, and I luckily I did save some money where if I had to, you know, I was just gracious. And that's the other thing with veterans. Don't wait until you get to a position of being homeless. Sometimes you're forced to, like, but this life just ends up that way. But at the same time, if there's things that you can do, just do it. It's not like what you did. You were involved, and I know this because I was with my son's mom, but that can totally set you back. But a lot of these younger guys may not have that, but instead of having a wife, they go out in front of Camp Lejeune and they sign a contract at 30% interest for the vehicle, and they're still having to pay the vehicle after enlistment and all of this. It's like, save your money, you know. Even as a veteran, you get your job as a veteran, they're thanking you for your service. You're working for Merrill Lynch. Recognize you still have a lifetime left to work. And not everybody, just because that one unit at Merrill Lynch appreciates you, doesn't mean that if they transfer you to another part of Merrill Lynch is going to appreciate you.
That happens. Just it's so many different transitions, and some of my journey, I'm out of the service. I'm trying to wait for the next emergency so I could see if I could rejoin again.
Yeah.
Well, I was in a reserve component, waiting for my next tour of duty, and in the end, I spent it. I don't know, more than 40 years to accumulate like 22, 24 years active duty. It was crazy because
You love the journey. Go
I
ahead.
love the journey. The journey
I did
was
too.
never really a destination. You know, I'm very grateful for it.
And
But
notice I said equivalent. because you and I both know, because of my big mouth, I couldn't live under UCMJ any more than longer, you know, at one concentrated period of time. I just couldn't do it. It's just, and I give a lot of credit that I did it in increments, to establish like 8 years, including reserve and active and stuff like that. But I give a lot of credit to guys like you who could do active duty, who could do reserve, who could do active duty again, active duty, and can really kind of like take that courage, as Aristotle said, that you find the mean in every situation. And I just appreciate your life because you've been able to do that. And it doesn't mean that you have to fly high in every way. None of us do, but I do love that movie, Where Eagles Dare. And it's just, yeah, we're daring eagles, and you're just that bigger brother that did it more than most, and did it your way, as Sinatra sang, and as I believe the Elvis version is 20 times better, but I'm biased. My
Like
dad's farm was right near Elvis's home, his old home in Tupelo. So I always go back to Elvis.
Oh my God, right there, Graceland in Memphis. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know the area quite well. I
Oh,
lived
do
around
you?
there for some time.
Oh,
I
wow.
was living in
Yeah, that's right.
Germantown.
Oh,
The
wow.
army. I was had the distinct professional pleasure that I was Department of the Army select for recruiting duty, my friend. I tell you,
Wow.
I'm
Uh,
like, what have I done wrong here?
what
And
kind of sins?
I ended up in Memphis.
Oh,
So
wow. Yeah,
that was my purgatory,
that
and
was
it
your
was a
purgatory. Yeah.
2 year tour of duty out there. But to God be the glory, man. I was promoted to master sergeant in the infantry,
That's
and
great. That's hard. That's hard to pick up.
when you're an EA, you cannot be on recruiting unless you are a career recruiter. And I
Yeah.
was definitively not a career recruiter.
Recruiter. Right. Right.
I'm like, I'm out of here. So I volunteered to Afghanistan, and whoa, thank God for that. But that was quite a journey. That was some of the most difficult times in my army, in my entire military career. Some of the most difficult, complicated, and darkest moments while on active duty.
Mm.
Were on recruiting duty. It was terrible. People would commit suicide because they were not meeting their quotas and things like that.
Yeah.
We had a few very sad incidents in my brigade, not in my battalion, but in my brigade. In the battalion that I was, the company that I was, we had a very toxic first sergeant who wasn't even supposed to be a first sergeant. I was senior to him, but he would lie about his data rank. He would lie about his data rank to make others believe that he was senior. Wow, you encounter these toxic people everywhere you go, and then you have to not become toxic yourself, so you can remain cool, calm, collected to deal with this negativity, to deal with this offensive onslaught of unhealthy people.
How do you think that can be managed as a veteran? Because you may be thinking, I don't need to deal with this. I served and I did this and I did that. And how do you think veteran can kind of like come to that level of awareness? Because what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
You have to be
That's life.
You have to be very humble because nobody cares that you went through selection, that you're airborne qualified, that you have 3 or 4 tabs. I don't have any tab. All I have was airborne wings, and I had my combat patch from group because I've been in combat zones with them, and I've been in a combat environment in Colombia, whatever. But we didn't get a combat patch in Colombia. I didn't get that combat patch that I went to Iraq, and in Iraq I was in a fob. I wasn't really engaged in real operations. So, the reality is always somewhere else. The real actions were not where they were supposed to be. They were somewhere else. And that was a conflict later on. The VA was saying, hey, well, you don't rate anything. You weren't on a combat area. I said, what the heck? so, so,
Wow.
so they look at the Iraq discharge. Yeah, oh yeah, okay, that's
Yeah.
good. Say,
Yeah,
hey man,
yeah,
it wasn't
yeah. I
Iraq, it
saw.
was in
Yeah, I
Colombia.
know. I know an officer that got a combat action ribbon, or I mean, combat action badge, or whatever the combat badge for just being on a convoy. And I don't want. I'm not minimizing it. I'm just saying that these different narratives exist, and he could get all the attention in the world for just being on a convoy. And there was something near that happened, but like it wasn't that near. And he even admitted it to me. And he was an officer, and he was a well liked officer. In my opinion, a kiss ass. I won't mention any names, but people, if you think who it is, it's not. It's someone very obscure that you would not. So I'm protecting this person's identity. He has his strong points, but I definitely see points where he was just there at the right time. And
Right time,
he
right
had the
time, right
right
place.
smile, you
There's
know.
there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it. If you're in the right time, in the right place, with the right uniform, right attitude, more importantly, then things might happen. But there was many times I had the right time, right place, right attitude, right everything, and it
Same
didn't
thing.
matter. I
Same
didn't get
same
what
thing.
I had earned or what I thought I could get or whatever.
Yeah.
In the end, you cannot expect any rewards. You,
Yes.
you, you cannot expect rewards. You cannot expect recognition for what things you have accomplished that you think rate a reward. They
Yes.
may rate a reward, but they may not. But even if they
Wait.
do rate a reward,
Yeah.
it's not to expect any rewards, and
I
then
want
you're
to.
at peace with it.
Yeah, I want
You're
to
at
go
peace with
back. Yeah, I want to go back to maybe a movie you saw. I saw it in the 80s. It was like one of Bill Murray's first serious movies, and it was his first serious movie, but it wasn't well received because he's such a comedian. The Razor's Edge,
it. What's that movie? Racer's Edge.
where he was a World War I veteran, and he ends up traveling the world, and he lives in Paris like during the roaring 20s. And his
Wow.
family's telling him to come back. I only came across this because we had HBO. I don't know what, maybe we weren't paying our bills, but we had HBO. But I got to see but I got to see it. And he goes to Paris after World War I, and he's got friends back in this elite Chicago background. And he's like, I'm not going back. I'm actually going to India next. And so after his time in the roaring 20s, writing books and all this, he goes to India and he makes this journey. But at the very end, he loses the love of his life. He's got all this pain from the war, probably like us in many ways. But someone asked him about, well, what's the meaning of life? This is after he's like in the Himalayas and Everest Base Camp. He says no one owes you anything.
Yeah, no
You
one
know,
does. No one owes you anything. No one is always. You're not always going to get recognition. Again, thank you, God, for Colonel Ripley. No one is going to thank you. That's what he told me. This is a real war hero, man. That man had a Navy Cross that should have been a
wow,
Medal of
honor, right? Wow,
for his actions that day, that fateful day at the bridge at Dong Ha,
wow,
which he destroyed, and that slowed down the advance from North Vietnam
yeah,
into South Vietnam. I mean, it was unbelievable. But anyway, no one is going to thank you. Look yourself in the mirror, accept yourself, value yourself,
yeah,
recognize yourself. I mean, it's like, thank you, Lord, for Colonel Ripley, because he truly empowered me with an understanding of self that until then I'm not sure I really had it to that level of depth. I might have had it, but
yeah,
not to the level of depth that he opened the door for me to attain.
yes.
And
That's
that was powerful to this day, to this day,
today's,
to this
yeah.
day,
That's
to this
an
day.
incredible thing. As we end this episode, which has been so rich on so many levels, can you share with me that was touched when you said about being thankful, and you've been speaking of that towards the end of the show, but you had said something about, and I was thinking about the movie because my dad used to take me when I did have my dad around, I was abandoned due to my mom's illness, but it had nothing to do with their love. It was more an issue of finances due to the healthcare system that we have. But the thing is that you had said something to me, and I thought about the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And it said to be thankful, right? To be thankful. You had said something about that you're always thankful of.
Every day. I'm the furthest thing away from saintly that anyone could possibly be. My sinful existence goes beyond measure and beyond description. But I am a man that submits to the word of God as best as I can in how I understand that submission. And on a daily basis, I give thanks. And one of the most basic expressions of gratitude is to thank God, our creator, for all things, all the good, all the beautiful, and all the wonderful, all the bad, all the ugly, and all the terrible, because all of them taught me something, and all of them made me into who I am, or who I've become, and who I am now, and who I might just continue to be for the next 30 or 40 years. I'll probably last a while longer,
Yeah, you
I
will.
hope so.
You will, and you've got a
keep,
couple of
keep the fitness going.
you've got a couple shows.
I went to selection when I was 39, man. That was unheard of. Q course at 40, man.
Unheard of, and
I was in incredible shape, but of course I didn't finish the Q course, but that's another story.
but
Selection I had to do it twice, man.
Well, at the age of 39, though, it's like, I just think, to be very quite honest, they should just limit guys, and even letting me go back into the military the last time. I really don't think they should have done that because of our age, because that's a real young man's job.
That's on a case by case. During the height of the war, they were enlisting people as old as 42 without prior service, and that had been done before. That had been done during World War II. So it was a time of an emergency, and for a period of time, there was people enlisting at age 42, but they had to meet all the physical criteria. And hey, when I was 42, I still looked like I was like, I don't know, 35.
But there's just, I guess what I'm saying.
I was in incredible shape till I was 52. Then after that, it began to go down.
Yeah. No, I get it. And,
case by case basis.
It's case by case, but by and large, the human being at age 40 to do this type of global war on terror work, it's very demanding. And the training for it is extremely demanding. What I'm saying is, I bet I would put all my money on you that if it was at a younger period, it would have been a different situation. But it's life. And as all veterans, we can always look at different things that happen to us and say, hey, just like you said, that thankful prayer. We pray for all of these different things, all that they are. As I told one woman I was on a date with once, and she was a big PR person for one of these big companies. And I said to her, rejection is a gift and acceptance is a blessing. She's like, oh, can I borrow that? Can I borrow that? And I'm saying to veterans, and it goes along with your prayer of thankfulness. Yeah, it goes along with taking on everything that's in front of you. Yeah.
Taking on as best you can, put your best foot forward.
Yeah.
And live another day.
Yeah. Well, with Pedro, Master Sergeant, we're gonna revisit him on a couple other episodes on veterans of color, and then also on some panels and some other projects. So you can't let the worms get to you yet. As we conclude, we really appreciate you. And do you have any last words for our audience?
Every day is a good day. When you're breathing, every day is a good day. Life is a tough undertaking, and no matter where you live, in the USA, in Spain, in France, in Ukraine. I used to live in Ukraine too before the war.
Wow.
And it's always tough no matter where you go. But don't make it tougher on yourself than it has to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And don't make it tougher on anyone else. You know, I think once we learn to smell the roses, and I always say that in the Marine Corps.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once you learn to smell the roses, you know, things kind of take a different turn. And then rather than living with regret, live with wonder and gratitude. Rather than living with anger, live with peace and serenity and joy of what experiences we have endured. And I know that some people really have endured some experiences that go far beyond anything we can describe. I have friends that lost limbs. I have friends that are no longer with us. You know, we can't describe the pain that some of our veterans suffer. But we can all hope to learn to take the suffering and the pain and make it into a beautiful garden of joy, of hope, and of inspiration for others.
Yes. That's
Because
a great thing.
we're all gonna pass.
Yeah.
And we need veterans. Why we need veterans? Because those veterans, before they were veterans, they were joined. They were young soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and guardians and Coast Guard personnel. And we need folks to come into our armed forces and have this great adventures and this lives of fortitude and lives with a purpose.
Yeah.
Lives with a purpose. And that is the biggest challenge. When we're in the service, we always seem to have a life with a purpose. And when you were not in the service, what is the purpose? And then we have to rediscover ourselves and find a new purpose, or an old purpose redirected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. This has been just a tremendous interview, and hopefully we'll have something similar like this in the future with you on a panel. And I'll tell you another Marine who's actually the real Jesse James. I tell you, he's the real Jesse James. He was a sniper. He was a recon man, and then robbed banks successfonna
A real gunslinger.
Interesting.
He
Yeah,
you robbed the bank.
You know, the guy. But we'll definitely do that panel in the future, and I just can't wait to have you back on. It's greatly appreciated, and you take care in Spain, and maybe we could do a veteran travel channel in the future also.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, you would be the head. So you take care, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
God bless.
God bless.
Veteran Etc. invites you to join us again with your host, Mike Kim, every Sunday. If the content from this podcast is informative to you, please share the podcast with others. Give a like and or post something you learned from the episode on social media. If interested in other truly informative podcasts like Veteran Etc., check out cominghomewell.com for a listing of other veteran-based podcasts. Thank you for tuning in.